And at that time, the capacity was only 5 megabytes. So for those of you who have iPods, that's one song on that big, huge thing. So by 1970, they'd gotten a little bit smaller. So it's not tremendously smaller, maybe half the size and probably a little lighter. And the capacity had gone up. So now instead of holding one song, we can hold 60 songs on this big thing right here. So over the course of the 80s to the 2000s, the capacity of the hard drives doubled almost every 18 months. And at the same time as the capacity doubled, the hard drives got smaller and they also got cheaper. And so to the point where in the 2000s, most people have hard drives in at least one in their house, and now most people have one in their house, maybe one or two in their cars, one or two in their iPods. So just for a comparison, in 1956, this is one song, and this is the latest version of the iPod Classic, and it holds 40,000 songs, and it fits in the palm of your hand. So things have changed tremendously over the course of about less than 60 years. And this is 160 gigabytes. So it's really quite amazing what's happened here. And a lot of what's gone into some of the more recent changes in magnetic hard drives is related to nanomagnetism. Those bits on that hard drive are starting to get into the nanoscale, and there's other reasons why we also call it nanomagnetism related. So this is a picture of the inside of a magnetic hard drive, and we have this platter here, and that's our media on which all the information is stored. And then this little piece right here is an arm that has a really tiny head on the end of it that reads and writes all the magnetic bits. And today the density is 400 gigabits per square inch. So that means that you can fit 400 gigabits of information in the area of the end of your thumb. And if you remember, I told you that in 1956, Feynman predicted, among other things, that we could store a lot of books on certain amounts of areas. Well, one of the things that he said was that we could store the entire Library of Congress on an area of 3 square yards. So that was his prediction back in the 50s. Well, today, if you look at the density of information that you can store on typical hard drives, you can buy a 2 terabyte drive that's only about 3.5 inches in diameter. And today we can store all of the Library of Congress on only 5 hard drives. So that's, again, really quite amazing. Hard drives actually move very fast as well. So if you calculate what the speed of your hard drive is when it's spinning inside your computer, the edge of your hard drive here is moving at a speed of 50 miles an hour. So that hard drive's moving at 50 miles an hour, and this little tiny read-write head is writing all of the information at that speed. So again, really quite amazing that this can be done. So every time I hear a talk on how magnetic hard drives are put together, I have this compelling urge to go home and back up my hard drive. It's really quite amazing to think that we can do this. So again, the hard drive platter here, we use that to write magnetic information. So if you look at the topography of a platter, it's just a flat, shiny film. But if you take a magnetic image of that platter, then what you see are these little white and black stripes. And those are actually the boundaries in between magnetic bits. So you have, in this section here, you have bits that are sitting in these directions beside each other, and then you've got a flip bit, and then you've got another upright bit, and then you've got a flip bit here. And the bit size on current hard drives is about 25 by 250 nanometers. Now, this is sort of a larger version of the idea of magnetic storage. The nice thing about magnets is they hold their moment. So you can write something, and then it's there for a really long time. Like for hard drives, more than 10 years, you can probably expect it to last. So this is like an eraser, and this is like a magnetic pen, and I can write a bunch of lines on here, and you can't see those at all. This is just a flat surface that doesn't show anything. But this here is a special magnetic viewer, and when you put it on top, you can see lines, and you can use it to look at what the structure of magnets are too. And I'll show you what this looks like really quickly over here. So you can see that there's, I'll show you, it looks better if I stand over here. You can see that there's lines on the screen. These lines are here, 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 here. And I can erase those lines and write some lines in the other direction. Put a circle around them. You can write your name in magnetic moments if you want to, and you can see that it's changed. So you can write information in a magnetic, in a piece of a magnet, and it will stay there for a very long time. So it's a very good way to store information. And if anyone wants to play with this after the talk, you're welcome to give it a try. It's much easier to see if you come up and look at it firsthand. So magnetic hard drives right now have a flat medium that's, and it's flat on the surface, it's smooth, it's continuous, and we break it up into little magnetic sections and just change the magnetic moment. And you can do this to a point. In 2006, we actually changed from the idea where we have all the bits lying flat in the plane like this, and we stood them all up like this. And that made the hard drives go to the next level in terms of the density, because you can pack them closer. It's just like people. If you have people lying down, then it takes up a lot of space, but if you make them all stand up, then you can pack them in really close. The same thing happens with magnetic bits. Well, for the next generation, there's some new ideas that people are looking into to try and use. Things like heat-assisted recording, because when you make them smaller, you also have to make them stronger so that they don't lose their magnetic moment. So we need new strategies for how to go to the next generation of recording. And the other idea is to break them up into little individual bits. So where you actually have individual nanoparticles, and every nanoparticle is its own bit. So there's a lot of research that's done in terms of trying to understand the properties of what happens to these individual bits so that we can make better recording devices, and also just because it's kind of interesting to see what happens at those length scales. So another piece of the whole puzzle in terms of nanomagnetism that I just want to mention pretty briefly is something called spintronics. Electrons have their own little magnetic moment. There's two different varieties. You can have a magnetic moment in one direction, and we call that the spin, or you can have what we call a spin down, where the electron's spinning in the opposite direction, or at least that's how we think about it. And normally, we don't care about the spin. We just use all electrons the same. But you can actually make use of the fact that an electron has spin with something called giant magnetoresistance. And we're already using it in the head of the recording devices that you have on your computers today. So this was actually the subject that won the 2007 Nobel Prize in Physics. And the idea is that if you have two magnetic layers that are close together and they're in the same direction, it's not very hard for the electrons to travel through those two different layers. But if you flip them around so they're in opposite directions, then it takes a lot more effort to push the electron through, and it's based on the fact that they scatter differently in the different layers. It's a little bit like polarizers. If you've ever played with optical polarizers, if you have cross polarizers, the light doesn't go through, but if you put the polarizers in the same direction, then it transmits the light really well. The same thing happens with electrons in magnetic materials. There's other devices that nanomagnetism would be useful for. One of them is called magnetic random access memory. All of you have random access memory in your computer, but most of you have probably had the experience where you have to wait for a few minutes while your computer boots up, right? It takes, sometimes my computer takes 5 minutes to load up sometimes. Well, if you write things in magnetic materials, then it holds the information. And so you don't have to refresh it when you reboot your computer every time. So that would be the advantage of having magnetic random access memory instead of the solid state random access memory that's in there right now. And again, it's based on this idea that you can have two magnetic moments that when they're in opposite directions here, the electrons coming in don't really come out the other side. But the electrons coming in, when you have magnetic moments in the same direction, mostly get through. And so you can use this to read the state of the memory at the different locations. So it's kind of a neat idea, and actually you can buy magnetic random